Good evening, everyone. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. So, before sharing the brief about the One for All session, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Bharati Ramachandran, CEO of FIAPO. Bharati is a resource mobilization and communications expert who has worked with nonprofits in South Asia and Africa for over 21 years. Her specific focus has been on strengthening right-based civil society foundations, NGOs, and as I am already sharing this, networks and grass groups. So before joining FIAPO, she ran a social enterprise called Parapani, so which was instrumental in developing the capacities of grassroots rights organizations and including in tough geographies like Afghanistan. So Bharati has been associated with FIAPO as a volunteer for over a decade and consulted with FIAPO for 18 months before joining in a formal capacity. So in today's session, Bharati's expertise will give us an insight into the role of a federation in strengthening the animal protection movement as a whole and its individual parts. The session will cast a vision of what coordinated advocacy, unified representation, aggregated research, and collaboration can achieve, and how FIAPO sees itself in that vision of a just world for all the animals. So I request all the participants to share their questions in the chat box. Over to you, Bharati.
Thanks, Deepika, for that very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon. I'm Bharati Ramachandran, and I'm talking about a topic that is enigmatically titled One for All. So before I start, I think a little bit of context would help. I have worked for 21 years in the nonprofit sector, and much of that time has been spent working with rights movements, Dalit, Adivasi rights, sexual and reproductive health and rights, LGBTQI rights. So from there on, the move to animal rights seems like a logical progression to me. Roughly paraphrasing our brilliant keynote speaker from this morning, Peter Singer, you don't have to be an animal lover to believe in the rights of animals. You just have to believe in rights. He said it, of course, far more eloquently than I do. Of course, I am mad about animals, but my background and the reason why I'm here is that I believe in rights. So much of my 20 plus years in the nonprofit sector has been spent doing this thing called capacity building, which is a secret phrase that I think only NGOs understand. So I want to tell you a story to set the context of where I'm coming from. In 2003, I was very new in the sector, just a few years in. An organization that worked in healthcare in the Nilgiris attended a training that I was conducting. And the person who attended the training said to me, we don't have resources, we don't have communication skills, and we are not able to attract talent. This was 2003. In 2020, at the start of the pandemic, in an entirely different context, I met the same person again. He said, give or take a couple of words, quote, unquote, we don't have the resources, we don't have the communication skills, and we are not able to attract talented people who will stay. 17 years apart, despite the amount of funding that has been pumped into this area that's called capacity building, small organizations have not really become stronger. They've not become self-reliant, and they've not become skilled in areas that are seen as very necessary for long-term sustainability. As a matter of fact, because of even more stringent rules, for example, around FCRA, the larger organizations attract more and more funding, while the smaller ones are fighting an even more unfair battle. So this collective dream that we have of a strong, vibrant, independent, non-profit sector in India, a sector that has the support of Indian people and to whom it's accountable, If this dream looks like a distant one when it comes to the entire nonprofit sector, then it's even more distant when it comes to the animal protection movement. And this precisely is where my passion and my hope for FIAPO as a federation come from. I'll come back to that later. So a little bit about nonprofits. I would just like to share this visual. You can probably see this visual here. That whole orange bit is the entire nonprofit sector in India. And that little white sliver that you see is the size of the animal protection sector within the nonprofit sector. So I was reading this, while working on the capacity building of the sector and how do we really make sure that animal protection organizations have what it takes. I was reading in that context a report, a study actually, that has been done by DASRA called 7 Areas. It's called, I think, Educate, Grow. I will sort of put the name of that study later, but DASRA's report identifies 7 areas of capacity building. Their strategy, leadership and talent, monitoring and evaluation and learning, fundraising, finance, accounting and compliance, communication, and board and governance. These are the 7 areas that DASRA identifies as areas in which organizations, nonprofits, need to be strengthened for them to reach a growth stage where they can successfully pursue their mission, communicate their work, raise resources for their work. So I will not talk about all 7, but let me just take one as an example. What does it look like? Let's just take the example of fundraising. So when an organization starts out in the initial growth phase, the organization sources funds from either the founder's savings or through contributions from friends and family. And as the organization becomes stronger and stronger in the fundraising space, it comes to a point where the organization has a large and diversified base of institutional funders and may also have a base of retail donors. And this is the curve that we would expect every nonprofit to take. And this certainly is the kind of curve in each of these 7 areas that we are looking at animal protection organizations to take. So in this context, given the context of the kind of needs that animal protection organizations have, I see the work at FIAPO, I see our mission at FIAPO in terms of 2 metaphors. Again, I'd like to share this. So we all know that this story, it's, I think, of course, an apocryphal story about this man who was walking by the side of the ocean, and he sees all these fish that have washed up to the ocean, and it's a very well-known and very commonly told story. And he keeps picking up each fish and putting it back in the ocean, and someone says, "But why are you doing that? There's so many fish, and they're going to wash up again tomorrow and the day after." And the man says, "Well," or the woman says, I prefer to think, and the woman says that, "But to this particular fish, it makes a difference." I would like to, most of our members, FIAPO's members, spend day after day, month upon month, caring for that single fish. Mira, the dog at Welfare of Stray Dogs, Bailey the goat, or Chester the cow at Animal Aid. We know their stories. So the work that each individual animal protection organization does makes a huge difference to that single dog, that single cat, that single goat, that single cow. And that work is irreplaceable. And FIAPO's mandate, therefore, is to do what we can to strengthen organizations that do that work that is indispensable when it comes to the particular fish, the particular dog, the particular goat, the particular cow. And we do this in various forms. We need to bring people together. We need to connect animal protection organizations to experts in various subjects. We need to make knowledge resources available, bringing young people into the sector. One of the objectives, one of the goals of this IFA is to really get college students in, young people in, so that they can firsthand get a feel for the issues that are important when we talk about the rights and welfare of animals. And this is why we engage with volunteers and our activists, because we are building a pipeline of people engaged in animal protection. Another area in which we could build the capacity of organizations is build fundraising capacity, for example. How to write a good concept note, how to do donor research, how do you talk to donors, build communications capacity. How do you write a good annual report? How do you tell your story on social media? How do you change minds? How do you change attitudes? These are areas in which we would really like to build the capacity of organizations. And there's a lot to be done. I mean, I could go on if I were to do a complete matrix of needs that the nonprofit sector has in terms of capacity building, that would take a very, very long time. There's a lot to be done, and we certainly don't have all the answers. We as FIAPO don't have all the answers, and I certainly don't have all the answers, far, far, far from it. But that's okay. Collectively, we do have the answers, at least some answers. We have enough and more people who have the knowledge and the skills. The challenge is, how do we move this knowledge? How do we move these skills out of the purview of individuals, even organizations, even individual organizations, and make it available to all so that we can benefit all organizations, so that we can benefit more animals, all animals? This is a primary challenge of FIAPO as a federation. So this is the work that we need to do in order to fulfill our mandate of strengthening each individual organization that then goes on to cater to that individual animal. But the other part of the story is that while we cater to organizations that serve the needs of each individual animal, who is watching out? Who is looking out for the ocean? Who is strengthening the ecosystem in which we are, in which we function? And that is a very crucial question to ask, because if there's something that I've learned at all in these 21 years of being in this sector, it is that oppression might be most visible at the individual level, at the level of the dog, the single cat, the single cow, but its roots are systemic. Therefore, the answers that we find need to be structural and systemic. In order that we can care for that single animal, for all animals, we need people and organizations that create structural changes, say through litigation, through policy advocacy, through changing mindsets, through changing attitudes. And this is where the second aspect of FIAPO's work comes in facilitating this structural work. As a federation, we are interested in aggregated research or data. For example, in aquaculture, if we are working in Bihar and Andhra Pradesh to look at the water quality in aquaculture farms, there are all those other states where who will gather this data and aggregate it? How do we coordinate advocacy for, say, fish welfare? How do we work on unified representation? As we are trying to figure out with the amendments, the amendment of the Wildlife Protection Act, how do we come together with our different capacities, with our different skills, with our different expertise? How do we bring that together and put forward our demands together and collaborate at various levels? So in another area entirely, let me give you an example. And I'm going to give you an example of vegan advocacy. There's a question of terminology. What is the terminology that works with various audiences? What are the motivations that work? Why do people turn vegan? Do they turn vegan because they are passionate about animals? Do they turn vegan because they care about their health? Are they very worried about climate change? Have they read the IPCC's CC report? Why do people turn vegan? And there's a question of tactics as well. What works best? Between the handful of organizations gathered here at IFA, we have a pool of knowledge which is sitting in the heads of individuals. Maybe it's sitting in the heads of teams, and maybe even it's sitting in organizational documents. How do we make that knowledge available to anyone who wants to work on vegan advocacy? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether the results we get are from Veganuary, vegan outreach, or from FIAPO's 21-day challenge. Whoever has cracked it, yay for all of us. When one of us wins, it is a win for all animals everywhere. And this is the spirit of generosity that I personally passionately believe in. And it's also the spirit of generosity that I believe exists in the sector. Idealistic much? I don't think so. As an aside, I always say that the reason I love the nonprofit sector so much is that it is the only sector whose mission is to make itself irrelevant. We are all working towards our own irrelevance. The day the need for a FIAPO doesn't exist, we are done with our mission. Of course, I'm aware that just as we cannot eradicate poverty, not in our lifetime, certainly, to get justice for animals is a lifelong process, and it's intergenerational task. And that's why I think we need generosity. One of the most frequent feedback we get from our members is we're not able to get local authorities to come when we call them about a rescue case or a case of cruelty. We're not able to mobilize civil society to help. How do we get people to come together in order to help an animal? So when one of us cracks a way to get the local police to swing into action, as the media puts it, or when one of us finds a model way of engaging with RWAs on the issue of community dogs, let's share it widely. When we share something, when we reshare something, let's generously give credit. As a sector and as a federation, I really believe that it's our job, it's FIAPO's job to build each other up. It is our job to support and enhance each other. And that is where this phrase, one for all, comes from. It's from the Three Musketeers, of course, but it's to say that this is one federation that really exists for all animal protection organizations across the country and for all animals. I'm idealistic enough to also hope that the second part of that phrase, which is all for one, is also possible. And in the coming weeks, months, we will work very hard at FIAPO. And this is really what I want to say to everyone that's here. And I want to leave you with the values that these are new values. The values aren't new, but they've been articulated afresh. And I would really like to leave you with this statement of our newly articulated values, the fact that we are many, we are not one organization. We do not exist without our member organizations, without our peers. We care deeply, and we care deeply about animals, and we care deeply about our members, our trustees, our donors, and everyone with whom we interact. We push boundaries, at least we'd like to. We get things done. We don't know everything, but we learn, we know, and we do. And thank you. Over to you, Deepika.
Thank you, Bharti. Thank you so much for sharing this insightful vision of FIAPO as a federation. We do have a couple of queries with us, so I'll start with that first query. From the perspective of animal welfare organizations, we are integrated into our work. How can we become integrated into our communication, into our representation? So when it comes to, a representative as a whole, what should be done?
Thanks, Deepika. Thanks so much. So the relationship between federation and the others is that it's much more than being a transactional one. It is one in which we are genuinely invested in each other's growth. But that trust and that confidence is built through transactions. So the irony of this is, while the relationship is not transactional, the trust is built through transactions. It might be built over a training that we do. It might be built through the help that we extend to an organization in registering an FIR, for example. It might be the way that we collaborate over a program. These might look like transactional exchanges, but there is deep underlying work that's going on, and that work is one of building trust. And the goal through all these transactions is to get to a space where we think of each other as allies that we can count on. So, and that is how I think, so I really don't want to look at this relationship as a, transactional one, as in what does FIAPO bring to the table and what do the members bring to the table? But it is one where we move through transactions to a relationship that's built on trust and one of allyship. So, yeah.
So thank you so much, Bharti. Another query is like, what values does an organization as a representative of FIAPO must have?
So I seriously think that we are in no position to tell another organization what values they ought to have. I think all of us here who work for animals passionately care about animals, and the overall value that we hold good is that we really want to work for the liberation of all animals. But like I mentioned in my talk, there are some things that I hold dear, and one is generosity. And I think, it's generosity at an institutional level, and generosity certainly at an individual level. And, this is sort of hard to build because we are constantly, the nonprofit sector is buffeted by the demands of, the nonprofit sector we don't live in a vacuum. The examples we see around us are from other sectors where there's a spirit of competition. And I really would like our underlying value to be one of collaboration. And, yes, where we work together. And, our phrase that we use everywhere, together we do more, that actually comes from this very strong belief that we complement each other. We don't know everything, and we don't have to know everything. We don't have to be good at everything. As long as together we are able to make a difference, that's what really matters.
Yeah, that's what really matters, Bharti. There is another question which says, when we say capacity building, is there a customized approach towards this initiative? What does it mean from an individual member's point of view and from the perspective of a federation? Yeah.
That's a very good question, Deepika. One is that I look at this as, of course, you take care of really members and the membership development. So, but the important thing is that there are different levels of capacity building. So if we were to look at it from a fresh canvas, the way that I would see it is right on top, you have what, like they have membership structures where you sign up for Canva and for free, you can do so much. I would really like that tier, the free tier, to be generous, where you have resources, whether it's in the form of data, whether it's in the form of these, tactics that work. And these are resources that are freely available to everyone, members and non-members alike. Because at some level, we also need to look at the wider section of all those organizations who are not yet FIAPO members. And look at, they could be public webinars that are accessible to all. They could be checklists. What should be on your website? What are the 3 things you must have on your website? How to create a proposal in 5 easy steps. So we can build a range of resources that are freely accessible to all organizations, members and non-members alike. At the second level, there could be resources for members that are much more detailed and that are available. For example, it could be access to some specific training that we offer, and it could be one-on-one consultation that we give organizations. And at the very, if you look at it as a pyramid, at the very bottom of this pyramid, there could be a much more detailed, in-depth needs assessment that we do. This could be subject-wise, and we look at, okay, how do we really, if we feel that most of our members need, of those 7 areas that I had indicated, if we feel that most of our members need, for example, training in compliances, statutory compliances, then how do we strengthen that in a systematic manner over the next 1 year? So that is much more customized to the needs of our members. So this is what I would say. There is a completely free-for-all resource bank that should be available to everyone. But at the same time, there could be a tiered approach to more in-depth work that we do on capacity building.
That's really great. We need to do in-depth work. That is certainly need of the hour. And we do have another query which says, Bharti, despite the various challenges, which an organization may be facing, how structural and systematic working can be achieved and what miracles it can bring?
We've been hearing about systemic changes since this morning. For example, Gauri Molekhi's session was talking about the kind of work that is being done through litigation on some very, very big issues, like the use of battery cages for chicken. And those are structural and systemic changes that organizations are bringing about in collaboration with one another. But at the same time, if you remember what she also said in her session was that each individual has a responsibility towards bringing about these systemic changes. And in a sense, our job is also to create that awareness, create that demand for systemic change, because systemic change will not happen in a vacuum just because 5 organizations want that change. There has to be this groundswell of demand for change. There has to be this wide recognition that things cannot go on the way they are. So that kind of demand generation almost for change is something that it's not just organizations that can do it. It's not just FIAPO members that can do it. Every single, Gauri's exact words, where you just have to be a citizen of this country, and every person can actually do it and ask for change to be made. And that's where our role as people who sensitize the public on issues, whether it is veganism or whether it is about the miserable condition of animals in factory farms, in intensive farming. It's our job to sensitize people so that demand, that horror, that this cannot go on, that sense of urgency needs to be brought in. And yes, so it's there are a few organizations. Well, there's a long answer to your very short question, which is that it happens at various levels. So there are a few organizations that work specifically in filing litigation or pushing for policy advocacy. There's a large group of organizations, again, that that make people aware, that educate people on, say, this particular example of the evils of animal agriculture. And then there is people, and people are the most important part of this work. And once they become aware, all of us become aware, and we don't tolerate it, that's when change really starts to happen.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Bharti. A similar question related to, as we were discussing systemic changes. So it says, how can we improve present system? So of government and public participation to save the animals.
So again, this, in certain, I think the one thing to understand is that no one really wants to be, or at least I'd like to think so. It might be a very idealistic belief. No one really wants to be bad on a daily basis. And so human beings largely, if presented with an incontrovertible evidence that what we're doing is wrong, will stop and think. And I would like to think that the same holds true of governments. Of course, one is, again, in one of the sessions, someone said that we need to go and ask the government, talk to the government, make representations as to what exactly is it that we want. As civil society, as the entire animal protection sector, we need to come together and present our demands. We have to engage in repeated conversations, ask for meetings, repeatedly go, and not get discouraged by the lack of understanding of one person that we meet, but have this constant conversation. It's a bit like, how we engage with our own families that play hardball, and in a sense, the government is really just that. It's conversation after conversation, representation after representation, presentation of facts, presentation of what demands we have, and doing it together. And at the same time, when you have this groundswell of public movement, public opinion, then the two unite. And that's how I believe governments can be changed and policy can be changed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bharti, for answering all the queries. So I think it's the time that when we all should, start living with this together, we do more approach. So thank you so much for answering all the queries.
Thanks so much, Deepika.